Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Cross to Bear podcast. I'm Phil Bear. I'm your host, and I always feel like a game show host when I say that, but I think I have to say it. I think it's a federal law. If you have a podcast, you have to say, I'm your host for today. So I'm your host, and I'm responsible for all this foolishness, and if anything goes wrong, it's automatically my fault. And I have a couple of outstanding guests that I'm going to be having with me today. And one of them is Tim Stratton, Dr. Tim Stratton from Free Thinking Ministries. Say hello, Tim.
Hey, hello. How's it going?
And I also have Josh Klein, who is Tim's partner in crime at Free Thinking Ministries. So hello, Josh, and say hello to our audience
hello.
of two.
Hello. It's good to be here. And you mentioned things going wrong. Tim, I couldn't get mine to stream to our platform, so you're going to have to do it.
Well, I see that, and I just tried. And while I was saying hello, so that's why I was a little distracted. And man, if I'm going to do that, I've got to type in a whole bunch of stuff, title, description. I don't think we're going to do that right now. So, Phil, this is
Okay.
Just you.
All right. That's fine.
Yeah.
And I want to express my gratitude to our audience for putting up with our technical conversation and working out some of these details.
Yeah.
So what I found out how to actually take a video that someone else on another channel has produced and add it to your channel. So we can do that with the Free Thinking Ministry channel, and that way people will be able to take advantage of this. The only disadvantage is they won't be able to participate in the live chat. And I want to invite everyone listening to make comments and to ask questions. If you want to ask a question, type the word question in a colon so that I can kind of spot that. Sometimes it's hard for me to spot them as things are going by. There's so many comments going by sometimes because of the thousands of people that are watching that I don't always catch the questions. But I will try to catch that. That was a little bit of dad humor from your host.
That was a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely ask questions, and we will try to get to your questions. And I think I'd like to do it in real time because sometimes we're talking about a certain topic, and people want to ask questions about the topic that we're discussing at the moment. And so I like to take those questions in the moment so that we can have a little continuity instead of asking questions about what we were talking about before and then we all forget about what we were talking about. So that'll be fine to go ahead and ask questions in the moment. But today we want to talk about a subject that is kind of a passion of mine, and that is Marxism. And sometimes people ask me why I'm interested in a dusty old philosopher from the 19th century. How does that have any relevance to our lives today and to our work in the kingdom of God? And my reply is that it actually has a great deal of relevance. And one of the questions that I ask, and it's kind of a rhetorical question, in my book, Marx Attacks, is if I were to ask you who the most influential philosopher of the 21st century is, what would your answer be? And my answer is a surprising Karl Marx. And sometimes people will be a little bit surprised by that. But the truth is that there was an ideology known as Marxism that Karl Marx pretty much articulated in the 19th century, and people put that into effect, and they implemented the Marxist policies and the Marxist ideology in various parts of the world, and it has resulted in absolute disaster for the human race. But what has happened, though, is that there is a new kind of version of Marxism that exists today that is called cultural Marxism. And that's the kind of Marxism that we are the most impacted by today. However, it's kind of an interesting development has been that we now have a presidential candidate that is interested in implementing classical Marxism, going back to classical Marxist theories, and wants to apply that to government. And one of the examples of that is that Kamala Harris wants to implement price controls. Well, price controls is part of a central planning type of ideology and type of approach that has always been endemic to Marxist regimes. So, and there are more examples than just that. But what we're headed for is socialism if Kamala Harris gets elected president. And so Marxism is going to be extremely relevant, probably even more relevant than it is now, if that happens. And I'm hoping and praying that that doesn't happen. But I think Christians need to be prepared for it, because something might go disastrously wrong and we might end up with a Marxist president. If that's the case, we're all going to have to be extremely well read on this Marxist issue.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people are, ask me, Tim, you're a theologian. Why are you spending so much time on this? And really, it's a theological issue. And so those who have expertise in theology and systematic theology, we can apply that expertise to these issues. That some people say, "Oh, you're just being political." I would say that Marxism is an atheistic religion. I mean, it's got its own problem of evil, the oppressor versus oppressed narrative, versus that Christianity. We have, I've published 2 books addressing this topic on how to solve the problem of evil, but the way Marxism seeks to solve the problem of evil is to classify everybody into either an oppressed or an oppressor, and then have those who are supposedly oppressed overtake the oppressor. And really it becomes an endless cycle. But you also have atonement, how to atone for your sins. So for us, being born white, we are born sinning, as opposed, or with Marxism in mind. And we can overcome that, but it's a religion of works, and we have to do all the right things, say all the right things, and then we can get into the good graces of the oppressed. But there's no hope. There's no afterlife, and it's completely focused on the material, on who has what. Do you have more than I have? Do you have more stuff than me? If they've got more stuff, then that's evil. They must have lied about it or deceived others to have more stuff than I do, and it's not fair that they have more stuff than I do, and I need to have just as much as they do, and sadly, that usually means that everybody. I just saw something recently from somebody saying they left utopia, and when you say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, I escaped the Soviet Union, where everybody was equal. But how do they make everybody equal? By making everybody poor and everybody suffering. So right. I don't know. I've gone off on a tangent there. Josh, would you add anything to what I've said?
Well, yeah, I could add tons of stuff.
You can.
So much like Phil. Now, I haven't written a book on it. Phil has, but I have spent a lot of time, particularly looking at this idea of cultural Marxism. Some people might, in a related frame, critical theory would be related to this. And so I've spent a lot of time looking at that. And when we first wrote our case to vote for an immoral candidate, Tim, one of the things that we talked about was Marxism with new skin. And we talked about kind of the cultural Marxism, the critical race theory, critical theory sort of stuff. That isn't Marxism in and of itself, but is based on those ideologies. And so we were really concerned about that. But like Phil said, when Kamala Harris became the presidential candidate, it wasn't just this new skin Marxism. Her vice presidential candidate has said one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. And so there's just this air of actually overt Marxist ideology and thought with this price controls. And you brought up the price controls. People will say people will come back Phil, and say to a person, well, they're not price controls. It's just trying to keep from price gouging, and we already have price gouging laws in place. And that just is a fundamental misunderstanding of what price gouging laws do and what these price gouging laws are supposed to do. And as I talk about it, all you got to do is look at the beginning of the Soviet Union and recognize that the proposals that Kamala Harris is making as far as price gouging laws to fight inflation, not price gouging laws to fight $100 toilet paper rolls because there was a natural disaster in a city, but price control or price gouging laws to say we're going to fight inflation. Well, if you take a look at Soviet history, price gouging laws started, or price control laws started the Soviet Revolution, and ended and was the ending of the Soviet experiment as well. On both ends, they did price controls. In the 1917 to 1923, they established price controls to fight inflation, the exact same type of policy that Kamala Harris wants to establish. And then that actually ushered in this communist regime. And then later, they implement price controls again. And anywhere it's been implemented, it's resulted to food scarcities, lack of resources, because there's no opportunity for upward mobility, there's no point in trying to make more bread, right? Because I can't make it cheap enough. So all of that to say, the reason we talk about it is because it's fundamentally against the law of Christ. It is fundamentally a system that's based in jealousy and in covetousness, and not in justice. Although they'll claim it's injustice. And
it's ironic because the Marxist is the battle cry of the Marxist is justice, economic justice. But what's happening is they are promoting an unjust system in the name of justice. So, and when you try to, if you tell an automaker or an auto retailer, whatever it happens to be, you can't charge more than X amount of money for your car, what are they going to do? They're going to slow down production and they're not going to invest in manufacturing more cars. Why? Because they can't make a profit. If they can't make a profit, they can't stay in business. They can't continue in their business if they can't make a profit. So what price controls do, partly, they do lots of different things, but one of the things that price controls do is they remove the profit incentive from people who are in business trying to make a profit and trying to provide a product or a service and trying to set a price that will allow them to make a profit, but will also compete with other people that are also in the same business and making the same product or service. So it is an absolute disaster. And Milton Friedman once made the comment that he said socialism has just resulted in unmitigated disaster for the human race over and over again in history. And the conclusion that people draw from that observation is that what we need now is more socialism.
We just haven't done it right yet, Phil.
Yeah.
We haven't done it right.
Right. Yeah. And so, but what I would like to do, I'm sure that there are people who are listening to this who are going to say, you know, guys, I get all these points that you're making, but I need to know what Marxism is. Some people that may be listening, maybe they have never studied Marxism, maybe they never, and they don't know what we're talking about. And so what I want to do is I just want to briefly as I can, I would like to just give us a little bit of a background and a history of Marxism. And it's going to be very high level, but I think it'll be meaningful and I think it'll be helpful. And then I want to trace what has happened in Marxism in history, and I want to trace the most important development in Marxism, and that has been the shift from classical Marxism to cultural Marxism. So please indulge me for just a few minutes. I'm going to try to make this as brief as I can. But in classical Marxism, if you want to understand classical Marxism, in other words, the ideology of Karl Marx and his followers, the best way to understand that is to grasp the concept of class struggle. That's what Marxism is essentially all about, even though there are all sorts of additional satellite ideas involved. Class struggle is the core of Marxism. Karl Marx believed that there were two classes in society, and they were economic classes. And the names of those classes were the industrial bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And for Karl Marx, the industrial bourgeoisie were pretty much the counterpart of the capitalists. So they were the ones who owned the means of production. And they hired workers, and the workers worked for the capitalists or the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie made a profit off of the work, off of the backs of the work of the proletariat, which was the working class. Marx saw that as an unjust system, and he considered that a form of oppression. So the capitalist or industrial bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie oppresses the proletariat, and they are exploiting the proletariat. Jamie says, spell it. Okay, IT. All right, I just spelled it.
There you go.
Bourgeoisie is BOURGUISIE. I think. I may have got that wrong, but I think I'm pretty close on that. BOURGUISIE. I think that's what it is. So, Jamie, go ahead and check that, Google that, and see if I spelled it right. So, or maybe he was asking me to spell something else. I don't know, but
proletariat or
bourgeoisie.
Yeah, you got to click on that so the audience can see how he just spelled that.
There you go.
Maybe we can just adopt that as our new spelling. So, yeah, this is how I think it's spelled. But anyway, Karl Marx saw that whole system as unjust, and he was convinced that sooner or later the proletariat would become so resentful of that system because they would get so tired of being oppressed, and we're talking about economically oppressed, that they would rise up and they would revolt against the bourgeoisie, and they would usher in a new era of economic equality. And Karl Marx called that the communist revolution, essentially.
So you're saying
now,
that ultimately the have-nots would get so jealous that ultimately they would start a war over it.
Actually, it's not that they would get jealous. It's that they would be resentful because they felt like they were being oppressed. So you can call it jealousy, but I would call it jealousy with a qualification. Because they would, I think resentful is probably the best word to use. And that's the kind of the concept that Karl Marx was really articulating at the time. They're going to get so resentful because they're so beaten down, they're so oppressed, they can't make the kind of money they want to make, and they feel like they're being exploited. And exploitation leads to resentment, and resentment leads to revolution. That was Karl Marx's whole theory. And now, again, I'm being very high level, but we have to pay attention to our time constraints. So, now, fast forward to 1883. Karl Marx dies, and he has lots of followers all around the world, and his ideas are expressed in various parts of the world, but the Marxists in the early 20th century were convinced that as soon as World War I broke out, they were absolutely convinced that World War I was going to be the catalyst for the communist revolution in Europe. Well, problem is, it didn't happen. Now, what happened very close to the start of World War I was the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. But the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was not the communist revolution the way that Karl Marx envisioned it. Because as far as Karl Marx was concerned, the proletariat the working class, the working people themselves, the workers would unite and rise up and overthrow the owners of the means of production. That's not what happened in Russia. What happened in Russia was that Lenin led the Bolshevik Party, and the Bolshevik Party was supposed to exist for the benefit of the workers, and they rose up and overthrew the existing order in Russia, but it wasn't the workers that led that revolution. It was the party leaders that led that revolution, and the workers were not resentful because they felt like they were being oppressed. They were resentful because of poor economic conditions. Mm-hmm. So, and they didn't blame someone because they felt they were being oppressed. They blamed poor management and poor policy, poor economic policy. And they felt that the Bolshevik Party had a better economic policy that was superior to that of the existing order at the time. So the revolution in Russia was not really a communist revolution. And the Marxists in the early 21st century saw what had happened. They saw World War I looming on the horizon, and they thought, all right, this is it. This is our moment has finally come. The communist revolution is going to occur as a result of World War I, and here we go. We're going to have utopia after the smoke clears. That didn't happen either. And so the Marxists of the early 20th, I keep saying 21st, the Marxists of the early 20th century were so disillusioned because the communist revolution did not occur as a result of World War I, and they were sitting around scratching their heads and wondering why. Why didn't the communist revolution actually occur as a result of World War I? And so a think tank was formed in Frankfurt, Germany, called the Institute for Social Research, and it was headed by several scholars: Max Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse, and George Georg. I call him George because that's the American pronunciation. Georg Lukács, Walter Benjamin, and these scholars at the Frankfurt School set out to try to explain why the communist revolution did not occur as a result of World War I. And the explanation that they came up with was, it isn't in economic categories that the real class struggle occurs. Class struggle really occurs in cultural categories, in our cultural institutions. It's the educational system. It's the arts. It's literature. It's the family. It's religion. It's all these institutions in society that are social institutions, and that's where the class struggle is actually really occurring. So we actually missed our cue here. We're still Marxists, and George Lukács wrote that, he said, don't anybody ever think that we are no longer Marxists. We are still Marxists to the core. It's just that we now understand where the class struggle really occurs. And so what they decided that they needed to do was they needed to come up with a methodology for how to accomplish the cultural Marxist revolution. And what they came up with was a methodology called critical theory. And the purpose of critical theory is to criticize. That's the reason it's called critical theory. Is to criticize the existing social order in order to destabilize it, in order to get people to be resentful of the existing social order and resentful of the fact that they are being oppressed in all these various institutions in society: the family, the church, education, government, the literature, arts. So that means that there are minorities and majorities in all of these cultural institutions, and the majority always oppresses the minority. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a minority, you are oppressed by definition because you're a minority. And if you are a majority class, then you are an oppressor by definition, just because you belong to that majority class. And in cultural Marxism, the majority class is white, cisgender, Christian, heterosexual. That is the description of the majority class. And so we white guys, and mostly male, because there's also oppression that occurs in the family. The father oppresses the children. The father oppresses the mother. The husband oppresses the wife.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is tied to not only being white, not only being Christian, not only being cisgender, it also applies to us being male.
Yeah.
It's our gender that is a part of our oppressive nature. So all three of us guys, we're all white guys, we are automatically oppressors. And so the purpose of critical theory critical theory's purpose is to go out and start spreading messaging that appeals to people's primal rage, to people's emotional states. And so you go out with critical theory and you say, hey, this guy over here, this presidential candidate and now president, he's a racist. He hates you. If you're a minority, he hates you. He's a racist.
Yeah.
That is not designed to be understood by the rational mind. That's designed to trigger rage and resentment, and that rage and resentment is supposed to trigger activism, and that activism is supposed to accomplish the deconstruction, the destabilization, and bringing down Western civilization so that it can be replaced by a new social order that is more conducive to a classless society where everything is just because nobody owns everything. Everybody owns everything in common. And there are no oppressors and there are no oppressed. So you have to overthrow these oppressors, and the only way to overthrow them is to spread the news that these oppressors are evil. And
so that's the gospel.
And
that's
that
gospel,
right.
That's religion.
Yeah.
That's right. That is the gospel of social justice, because social justice is a term that is often used to describe this transition, this revolution. It's a cultural revolution, not an economic revolution. Now, that doesn't mean that the economic categories in Marxism have disappeared, because there is still a narrative out there that capitalists are greedy and that they are exploiting their workers. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like that. Yeah. Can I add a few things onto that?
Sure.
As we're talking about this, as you're sharing, the Frankfurt School message, it wasn't like they reinvented it out of whole cloth. They were pulling pieces out of what Marx was actually saying. Frederick Engels, one of Marx's confidants and best friends, he furthered the idea of the nuclear family being the enemy of the Marxist revolution, that the state should be primary care provider for the youth so that the proletariat could actually rise up. And so they weren't saying, like you said, they weren't saying, oh, this is a new theory. They're saying, oh, Marx just didn't have it all. We are perfecting his theory.
Right. It was incomplete.
Yeah. And what I tell people when we talk about Marxism is, Marxism isn't, there's a philosophy behind Marxism, but the parts that we think of Marxism isn't as much a philosophy as it is a prediction. And it's because Marx gets the understanding of the human condition exactly wrong, that his predictions completely fall apart, and you need to use manipulation in order to further and get people to embrace those predictions. If you tell the truth, people aren't gonna do it. And so those are just some of the things that I would share off the top of it too. There's tons of stuff you could share about Marxism, and
we could be here all day with it. And so those are great insights. And the other thing that I want to mention, and Tim and I have talked about this before, because Tim and I have done podcasts on Marxism and cultural Marxism in the past, and on critical theory. And one of the things that we brought out, and this is extremely important for us to bring out as well, is that there are some terms that have been redefined. And we need to be aware that when someone starts talking about various topics and someone starts using these terms, we need to understand that they don't mean the same thing by those terms that we do.
Yeah.
And one of those terms is truth.
Yep. Yeah.
For Karl Marx, truth was not the rational property of a logical proposition. That's not what truth is. For Marx, truth was something that developed in history. It was the conditions that were always in flux in history, and history is always moving toward a specific goal, and truth is the attainment of that goal in history. That's what truth meant for Karl Marx. So when people start talking about being truthful, and I've heard Kamala Harris say, we want to fight for the truth. Well, people need to understand that they don't mean that she doesn't mean by the word truth what they mean when they use the word truth.
Right.
She's not fighting for some kind of abstract philosophical concept. She's fighting for a historical objective. And that's what she means by truth. The other term that we need to understand that has been redefined is the term reason or rationality. For us, rationality is applying the rules of inference and the laws of logic to our reasoning processes, and then we arrive at propositional truth based on rationality. That has nothing to do with what Marxism thinks of as rationality. For Marxism, reason is whatever will accomplish the objectives of the Marxist agenda.
No.
So if you're going to accomplish the Marxist revolution, then that is reason. You're being reasonable.
Even if you're knowingly stating false claims, that becomes a reasonable thing to do because the ends justify the means.
Right. And we say, yes, and we constantly say that truth doesn't matter in Marxism, whether it's classical Marxism or cultural or neo-Marxism. And that's not perfectly accurate because truth does matter. It's just that they don't mean the same thing by the word truth and we do. Propositional truth and reason and evidence and something that you can demonstrate, that doesn't matter in Marxism. But truth matters in Marxism. It's just truth that means something different in Marxism. And if we don't recognize that, then we're gonna be confused and we're not going to understand what's going on. So.
Yeah, they use the same vocabulary but a different dictionary. I mean, even with the DNC, they had the word freedom everywhere. They mean something completely different by freedom. And it reminded me of the conversations that I have with Calvinists all the time about what I'm like, wait a second, let's define our terms. We mean something completely different by the word freedom. Now, interestingly, I find that I spend so much of my time arguing with Calvinists over free will issues and the kind of freedom that we have. What I love about most Calvinists is they see the clear and present danger of this Marxist ideology. I think of guys like James White. James White is hitting the ball out of the park with his analysis of the evils of Marxism and how he's confronting it right now. I'll tell you what, I may have debated James White. I might disagree with him on Calvinism versus Molinism, things like that. But I got to tell you, I believe that Marxism is such a clear and present danger. It's a threat to humanity, not just to me, but to my neighbors, to the neighbors that I'm commanded to love by Jesus. I mean, Marxism has killed between 100 and 150 million humans in the last century. You know, compare that to the minuscule amount that Hitler's Nazism killed. And I say that sarcastically.
Comparatively minuscule.
I mean, if you're gonna,
yeah.
Pardon me.
I said comparatively minuscule. I mean, 6 to 9 million people, still a large group.
That's why I say I'm being sarcastic because when you look at the death count from each philosophy, Marxism is way worse, and it's brought so much destruction over the last century. And so anybody who I mean, a lot of people today say, well, oh, we shouldn't get so political. Well, look, we're commanded to love our neighbors. And I don't think anybody would have a problem opposing the Nazi party. And they wouldn't have a problem saying, oh, that's being too political. Well, I think we should also oppose the Marxist party. Just looking at the evil philosophy that it's based upon, the historical data showing just how evil it is, and the death count that it's left in its wake. So I think we should oppose the Marxist party. Well, what do you know? That's the modern day Democrat Party,
Right.
which they are advancing. So
Yeah.
look, I see it as such a clear and present danger that I've dropped over the last couple months. I don't know the last time I've debated Molinism or human libertarian freedom with a determinist, because I realized, okay, I will partner with Calvinists who I think are wrong about their Calvinism, but hey, we need to band together to fight against this greater evil. And then after we defeat that, we can go back to having in-house debates, sparring matches with those we love. But yeah, I've dropped. I mean, I just saw yesterday one of my greatest fans published, I don't know, another 500 pages or something, critiquing me on Molinism and stuff. And I saw it and I was like, I don't care. I don't even care anymore. Let it go, because I'm focused on something else right now, and it's because I love my neighbors.
Yeah.
But
and it's not just the body count that is the problem. I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said, it might have been somebody else, but I think it's Margaret Thatcher who said the problem with socialism, and socialism is really a derivative of Marxism. Mm-hmm. She said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money.
Yep.
And they're all calling for the equality. Equality is one of the big worship words in Marxism, and they do actually end up with equality at the end of the day. But what happens is that everybody's equally poor. So we have equality in our poverty, and so if that's what you want, if that's the kind of equality you want, that's the kind of equality you're going to get, because that's what's going to happen. So yeah, it's economic devastation. It's actually devastation in terms of human life, and so I don't blame you. I think it was about a year and a half ago. I'm pretty sure it was a year and a half ago. I had a conversation with James White when he was visiting Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
And he had just done a session on LGBTQ ideology and woke ideology and transgender ideology. And he hit it out of the park. Tim, your description is absolutely accurate. Mm-hmm. He hit it out of the park when he was on a panel discussion on those topics. And I said, well, I think you should write a book about this, because you're so articulate. You're so articulate on this ultimately Marxist issue. And he looked at me and he said, Phil, he said, I don't know near enough about this subject that I would need to in order to write a book about it. And I'm thinking, well, James, you're kind of being humble here, because I just heard what you had to say in that panel discussion.
Right.
And if you're going to say more things like that in a book, then I would promote that book, and I would say, hey guys, if you can only read one book about Marxism, read James White's books, because he's so articulate in this manner. Yeah. I'd rather them read his than read mine, but because he has a far greater reach than I do.
Right. Right.
But that is something that I think is extremely important to bring out, and that is that we at the end of the day, the outcome of the Calvinism debate, I don't know that it's going to save anybody's lives. I don't know that it's going to prevent financial ruin. If I convince somebody that Calvinism is false, it's not going to save anybody. It's not going to save anybody's life. It's not going to cause anybody to somehow be be stable in their financial life and be stable in their social life, then, but in this issue, in Marxism, the consequences and the stakes are so unbelievably high that we have to make we have to we have to make sure that we address it and that we get out there and make a difference, because there's so much riding on this issue. It's mind-boggling.
Let me add something. Again, looking at these different words that are used. Again, we use the same vocabulary, but we have a different dictionary. And so, the word equality, for example, what the Marxist means by equality is, hey, everybody's going to have the same amount of stuff. Everybody's going to have the same amount of money, even if that makes us all poor. What Christians mean by it is, hey, everybody is equal in the image of God, no matter how much stuff you have. Whether you're rich or poor, guess what? You're equal in the eyes of God. No matter how big and strong you are. Shaquille O'Neal and myself are equal, right? Now, if we just judge us on size and strength, right? If that's how we measured importance or value, then Shaquille O'Neal would be more valuable than me or anybody else, anybody who's bigger than. But no, even the little old lady, she's a soul in the image of God, and that soul it's an immaterial thing. It doesn't have size, it doesn't have mass, and neither does Shaquille O'Neal's image of God, right? The same thing that survives the death of their bodies is equal. There's no color to it. There's no size or strength to it. It is equal in the image of God. And that's what makes us all equal. That's what grounds human rights that ought not be violated by anybody, including government. That's the foundation that's the philosophical and theological foundation of America. And that is the greatest opposition to the Marxist view. It is antithetically opposed to Christianity and also to the theological foundations of America. And so, when we say equality, we mean completely different things. Scripture is clear that we are equal in the image of God, no matter if you're rich or poor, period. But the Marxists are going to say, no, to have equality, everybody's got to have the same amount of stuff. What a horrible religion, Right. What do you guys think?
Yeah. I want to go back to some of the different definitions of words too, as you were talking about that, because equality is one of them. We hear people say things like, "Well, Marxism is just equality of outcome," and to a certain extent that's true. But it's really the elimination of class. That's kind of the goal of Marxism, which means everybody is on the same plane. But I don't think people recognize what equality of outcome actually is, or what that elimination of class actually is. And so I remember having a conversation with somebody on Facebook, and Tim, you and I had a discussion about this, and we were talking about Kamala Harris's, because she has a video where she says equity is different than equality, and equity really is just equality of outcome. That's what equity is. We want everyone to arrive at the same place. And she said, well, I'm not sure. This person said, well, I'm not sure I disagree with equality of outcome in some circumstances. And I said, I disagree with equality of outcome in almost all circumstances. I can't even think of a circumstance where I think that I would want equality of outcome. And I think it's because my understanding of equality of outcome is even a little bit different. Because what this person was saying was, well, kids go to first grade and they all learn to read, and then they go to second grade. Well, that's not equality of outcome. Equality of outcome is the kids go to first grade and they all learn to read at the exact same level, and that level is only commensurate to the lowest common denominator.
And they all get the same grade.
Yes, and they all get the same grade. That's equality of outcome. It's not that they went to school and they all got a chance to learn to read, and some read better and some read worse. That's equal opportunity. And when people say things like, well, Jesus would have been for equality of outcome, I would have said, what part of I am the door, I am the gate, what part of no one can come to the Father except through me is equality of outcome? Because that is equality of opportunity. Everyone has the opportunity to be saved by Jesus. The outcomes are not all going to be equal. So I think we need to help people understand that we don't want equality of outcome, because ultimately somebody in a position of power and authority has to inculcate that equality onto people. And that means that's why all communist and socialist countries devolve into a communist dictatorship, because you have to have a strong man to make sure everyone's equal.
And the other thing that people need to understand, and this is extremely critical, is that equality of outcome is not something that people achieve. It is outcome by government force.
Yeah.
And it's not even something that's given. It's something that's foisted onto people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's another aspect to this that I hear constantly. People will tell me that there is obviously a class oppression that is occurring in our society, and the reason we know that is because there are such wide socioeconomic disparities that occur in our society. White people make more money than black people. White people are more educated than black people. There are more black people in prison than there are white people in prison. So obviously there is a class struggle in our society. And obviously white people are oppressing black people. Just look at the statistics, and how can you not see this? I've actually had someone ask me that question. Phil, how can you not see this obvious oppression in society? Because white people are richer, and white people, they have more stuff. White people have more power, and this power dynamic is an extremely important ingredient in this whole ideology as well. And what I have always replied is the reason that there are disparities in our socioeconomic metrics is not because there is oppression. There are a lot of reasons why there are disparities. There are socioeconomic disparities in our society, and parts of those reasons are, first of all, there is cultural pathology that occurs in some minority communities. That's not a matter of oppression. And the other thing that we need to understand is that not everybody wants the same things. Not everybody has the same priorities. If you read Thomas Sowell, he has a list as long as your arm of how people are all different. And because people are all different, they're obviously going to come out on a different plane or a different level. And they're on the economic scale and on the social scale and on the educational scale, they're going to have different outcomes just because they're different people and they have different priorities. Some things are more important to them than they are to other people. And if that's the case, there's never, ever in the history of the world going to be this condition where people are relatively even on every metric in society. It just simply does not happen. It simply can't happen. And the fact that it doesn't happen does not mean that there's some kind of oppression going on. That I'm being held down. The scales are being tilted against me, and so that's why I can't achieve what I want to achieve economically and socially in my life and in my family and in my job and so on. So we have to get rid of this idea that disparities are automatically an indicator of oppression. That's simply not true.
Yeah. Disparities don't equal inequality.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you gonna say, Tim?
Well, I was just gonna say, as a theologian, I want to keep bringing it back to how it opposes Christian theology, ultimate reality. And Josh, I think you mentioned for the folks who say, "Hey, Jesus would want equity." Then they've got to be universalists to say that. They can't believe in hell. I mean, the mere fact, if somebody believes that hell exists, which I do, then at least some form of hell, some form of eternal separation from God. Well, then equity is false. So for the person to say that Jesus would want equity, it seems to me they would have to say that God, I think that God would determine and make sure that everybody has the same level of heaven, same amount of crowns or thorns in their crown, and thorns in their crown, jewels in their crown. Um, getting my crowns mixed up here. And everybody's got the same everything in heaven,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how they live their life. Even if they were Hitler, even if they hate Jesus, no matter what, everybody's going to end up the same. I mean, think how absurd that is. But that is what the person who's trying to marry Marxism to Jesus.
Well, and the people
Jesus
who
would
say
have
that
nothing to do with Marxism.
Yeah, and the people who say that would say, "Oh, well, Jesus would have been a Marxist." Even Marx and Engels knew that that wasn't the case. I mean, Engels made fun of Christians that embraced Marxism, saying I can't remember the exact quote, but he basically said they're superfluous in their belief, or something like that. That these two things can be married, because he recognized that faith in a higher power than God would actually force the communist revolution to not occur, because you could look for something beyond the physical the physical oppressor. You could be killed and still look for hope. And so he understood that. And
the other thing that we need to understand is a term called regressive tolerance. And that was a term that Herbert Marcuse coined, and he has a paper called Regressive Tolerance. And regressive tolerance is basically the idea that there's something oppressive in your society, that rich people, let's say that CEOs and owners of big corporations, they're all greedy. Mm-hmm. And if you are relatively well off, and if you're comfortable financially, if you have all the things that you need materially, you're in the middle class somewhere, and you're doing okay. If you're doing okay, you're going to tolerate that greed, because it doesn't affect you personally. And Herbert Marcuse said people who are guilty of repressive tolerance are ultimately selfish. They don't care about their neighbor. They only care about themselves, and as long as they're doing okay, they're going to tolerate that greed. And if that's the case, then Herbert Marcuse said, guys, we need to reorient our thinking completely. We need to stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about our neighbors, which is ironic.
Yeah.
Because loving your neighbors is one of the central principles in Christianity. But in Marxism, thinking about your neighbors is about making sure that we don't tolerate all of these horrible evils in society. And Herbert Marcuse actually came out and said that religion, and Christianity in particular, I think he even mentioned Christianity, but I'm not sure, I'd have to go back and find the quote, that religion is a pathology. Because what religion does is religion gives you comfort. And if you're enduring oppression and you turn to God for comfort, then you will tolerate that oppression because you've been comforted from your religion. Mm-hmm. So, and any system that intones that Christianity or religion in general is a pathology, that should raise a red flag for Christians just right off the bat. Yeah. But people are usually not aware that's the case. You know.
So why is it today that so many Christians in America, so many churchgoers in America, and even pastors in America seem to be tolerant of certain Marxist ideas? Josh, we won't name names here, but Josh and I have been having some interaction with a guy who's well-known. He's a well-known guy in evangelical, in the evangelical realm in America, right? And I called him out on it. I said, "You seem to be a Marxist sympathizer." He's a friend, and I said, "You seem to be a Marxist sympathizer." And we went back and forth. He said, "No, I'm not a Marxist, not a Marxist." But I said, "But look at everything you're saying here. That's like me saying, hey, I'm not a Christian, but I do believe in in the one triune God, that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. I love Jesus more than anything, and I strive to live consistently with the law of Christ, but I am not a Christian. Well, that's crazy. Finally, Josh said, well, to our friend, you seem to be tolerant of certain Marxist ideas. And Josh, am I right? You kind of didn't push back against that so much. But it seems to me that so many Christians are buying Marxism right now when it is antithetically opposed to what they stand for and what they say is true. Help me out here.
Yeah.
I think part of that is they don't know what it is. And I think the second part is and I remember thinking this when I was in high school, and people have said this in churches for a really long time. And it's wrong, because Marxism is evil. But they'll say, communism, Marxism, it's a good idea. It's just people are too fallen to actually, I don't know if you've ever heard this, like, we're just too imperfect to actually do it. And so people take power, and it's not a bad idea, but it is a bad idea. At its core, it's rotten, because it doesn't actually understand anything about the human condition or justice or Marx was a good writer. But he wasn't a good thinker, in my opinion. And that's part of the thing too, is when you redefine terms and words like loving, like truth, like justice, and you tell people, well, you're not these things if you don't agree with this, and you tell them over and over again, I think people start to go, well, you know what, that might be true. I really want to care for the poor, and maybe it is true that I tend to think that that's what happens. Either they don't know enough about it, or they've been convinced because we haven't substantially pushed back on it because we don't want to get political, or because we go, well, it would be nice for everyone to have the same thing. But that's antithetical to Scripture.
Right.
Like you said, Tim, if Jesus was a Marxist, then he either was a liar, because he doesn't. It's not just universalism. I mean, he tells his disciples, "You will judge the 12 tribes." That means there's going to be weights and measures. That means justice is not going to be equitable, but people are going to be judged equally. So
Great point.
I think that's why. Yeah.
Well, Tim, what you just cited is an example of one of the things that I am most concerned about in this whole issue. And that is that Marxism has not only invaded our culture, it has invaded the body of Christ. And there are people who call themselves Christians who are now articulating Marxist ideology, and sometimes they don't even realize it. And people think, well, Phil, how could that happen? How could Christians fall for all this Marxist ideology? Well, I am convinced that the primary way that happened is that in the interwar period between World War I and World War II, when World War II was looming on the horizon, all of the Marxists, or most of them, the majority of the Marxists in the Frankfurt School, were Jewish. And when they saw how the Jews were being so persecuted in Germany and in Europe in general, that was beginning to be a pattern. And when they saw that, they fled Europe and they took up stakes in the United States. And some of them went, when they came to the United States, they set up shop in Columbia University in the social sciences department.
Wow.
And that planted a seed, because suddenly in an American university, Marxism becomes an element, becomes a poison, a cancer, if you will. And that began what Gramsci called the march through the institutions. And what happened is that Marxism spread from Columbia University and others throughout all of our colleges and universities in the United States, to the point where the influence was so powerful that people are going to these liberal arts colleges and universities in the United States, and they're graduating with a degree in Marxism, basically. It doesn't matter what their degree was in. They have been indoctrinated into Marxist ideology in the universities. Now, they go on to seminary. And you got these Marxists who are graduating from the colleges and universities, and they go to seminary, and sometimes the seminaries start becoming liberal, start becoming Marxist, and pretty soon people are graduating from seminary and becoming pastors, and they are actually certifiable Marxists when they start their pastoral ministries. And Marxism now is contaminating the church through that entire process. And there are other ways where Marxism is contaminating the church, but I grew up in the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Church has been preaching a gospel of social justice for as long as I can remember. And what happens is that people in the church hear the gospel of social justice preached, and they hear justice, social justice. Boy, man, that's a powerful influence. And when someone begins to articulate the ideas of social justice and equality of outcome and the elimination of poverty and making sure that rich people and greedy people don't hoard everything and don't make it so that other people have to remain in poverty, when they hear that, it is unbelievably powerful, and they don't know the difference between that and the gospel. It sounds like the gospel to these people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think I don't know if you know who James Cone is, but in liberation theology, he actually somebody that did critical pedagogy, which is a branch of critical theory, wrote the foreword to his book on the gospel and justice, and so I think he had a major impact in the transformation of the gospel being, because Jesus says, I came to set the captives free, and that means all of the oppressed, and then we start to smuggle in all of these oppressor matrices into Scripture. And so he did that. That was in the 50s and 60s. And I wanted to plug, there's a lot going on about this book, right? This Shepherds for Sale book. And I wrote an entire review of it on freethinkingministries.com. You can go find that if you want. It's really long. It's good though. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
It's worth reading. I want to tell everybody it's worth reading. They need to read it.
Yeah. So, but in the introduction, Megan, I think actually does a great job of actually explaining this. So she actually quotes a book from Paul Kengor, I don't know how to say his name, but The Devil and Karl Marx. And she says, between 1920 and 1950, there was a deliberate infiltration of mainline Protestant churches to woo pastors to a socialist program. Yeah. He says, documents in the Soviet Comintern archives on Communist Party USA show how communist officials in Moscow and New York deliberately targeted prominent Methodist seminary professor Reverend Harry Ward to help push their propaganda. In one letter from December 1920, Ward is listed by Comintern officials as a source to get their materials on the shelves at the seminary library. So that's just a small. But The Devil and Karl Marx, if you want to read more about it's a little snippet in this book, but if you want to read more about that, there was a concerted effort to the long march through the institutions. That's the institutions of law, family, education, and we're seeing it come to fruition today, where Kamala Harris can say these things, and people can say, "That's not socialism. That's political expediency." And it's like,
and it's sharing. It's sharing. It's compassion. It's taking care of each. We're just taking care of each other. No, you don't take care of each other through government force, people. I don't understand why you can't see the distinction. But just an illustration of how Marxism has infected the church is that I believe, and this is a very controversial thing for me to say. I understand that it's controversial, but I am convinced that Christianity Today is now a Marxist publication.
Well, I agree.
I believe that Russell Moore is a dyed-in-the-wool hardcore Marxist. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of editors and a lot of writers in Christianity Today that write articles that are just spewing out Marxist ideology like a fire hose.
So you don't think they're merely useful idiots, to use the Marxist phrase? You think they're intentionally Marxist?
Not necessarily. I think they may be useful idiots. And by the way, for those of you who haven't heard the term useful idiots, it's not a derogatory term. Because a useful idiot is somebody who can be so taken over in their minds by Marxist propaganda that they become soldiers for the Marxist revolution. And that's why they're called useful idiots, because they don't understand that their minds have been taken over, that they've been brainwashed by Marxist propaganda. And so I think that there are Marxists in Christianity today that don't even know they're Marxist. And one example is a lady by the name of Kelly Hamron. And I wrote a chapter in my book, Marx Attacks, about Kelly Hamron, and the chapter is called The Anti-Marxist Marxist. Because Kelly Hamron...
You've got an article in the same title, I think, on the Free Thinking Ministries website, don't you?
Same article.
Yeah, okay. Great.
Yeah, I just took that article and made it a chapter in the book.
Oh, okay, awesome.
And in fact, Tim, you were the one who prompted me to write that article.
That's right. That was back in 2020, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
2020 or 2021, somewhere around in there.
That's where it really got my attention, was seeing what was going on and this, with the whole COVID lockdown, and then the riots in the streets with Black Lives Matter, and then to hear the women leading Black Lives Matter saying, well, we are trained Marxists.
Yeah.
Their own words. And they
Right.
wanted to see the destruction of the nuclear family.
Right.
Saw that as an opposition to their goals. And I'm like, this is pure objective evil. Yet I saw a lot of people, even in my church, cheering for it. And I was like, guys, come on, this is...
Yeah.
I mean, I was just like, we have to fight that. We have to oppose this if we're going to be good theologians and just good Christians.
Yeah. But it's not surprising that Black Lives Matter, a Marxist organization, is going to advocate the destruction of the nuclear family, because Herbert Marcuse said religion and the family, all these things are oppressive.
Yep.
The family is an oppressive institution, so of course they're going to want to abolish the family. It's simply not rocket science.
So look at this. I mean, you look at even what Tim Walz, the guy who's running for vice president of the Democrat Party right now, or for America right now. Hope he doesn't get it. Right, but he's also the governor of Minnesota right now, and he, along with Gavin Newsom in California, have signed bills that in their states that would allow, really, that violate the parents' rights when it comes to how to raise their kids. So the government is going to step in. Because
it's not just allow the government; it's the government. It's forcing the government to take control over a child if they believe they for gender transition.
Right.
Yeah. And you don't do that unless if you believe that the nuclear family is opposed to to this utopia, then you do that kind of thing. If you believe, well, wait a second, parents have God-given rights here, how to raise their kids, and you can't violate that, then that's why we've never had a problem with that in America before. But now we've got politicians running for the highest office who are willing, and not just willing, but say, no, the government needs to step in here and violate what the parents want to do, because it's not doesn't have their Marxist agenda in mind.
Right. Well, we need to focus also on the idea of racism, because that is a huge issue in Marxism, and that's a huge issue in critical theory. Probably one of the most often repeated messages in critical theory is that all white people are racist. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you have white skin, you are a racist. Period. You're a racist. Period. There is no discussion on the matter. And I have a couple of video clips that I would love to play for you. If I could find them, I can go try to find them and play them for you. And there are people who will give seminars, and they will say, if you're a white person, you're a demon. You're evil. You're a racist. You just simply a racist, period. Whether you know it or not, whether you'll admit it or not, you're just a racist. And Robin DiAngelo wrote a book called White Fragility, and she echoed the same thing in her book. And one of the chapters in my book, Marx Attacks, is a review of Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility.
I'm sorry you had to read that.
I know. Yeah, I'll
It's a screed. That's
it is.
Yeah.
I can quote what I wrote about it. What I wrote about it in general is that when I read these books, it's like going to a movie, and you're 5 minutes into the movie, and it's just a unbelievably terrible movie. But if you're like me, you'll just sit there and you'll keep watching it, hoping that it's going to get better, and hoping that you're not wasting your time. By the time the movie is over, you realize that hope was a forlorn hope, and that it never got any better the way that you were hoping that it would be. That's what it's like reading books like White Fragility and Critical Race Theory by Richard Delgado, and Ibram X. Kendi's book, and so on. So
be an anti-racist. The color of compromise. All those. Yeah.
But I'm going to give you two things that are extremely ironic, and I actually find humorous. I find hilarious, to be real honest with you, and I'm hoping I'm not being too harsh when I say that. The first one is that I saw a headline today that said that Robin DiAngelo is accused of plagiarizing minorities.
Yep. And in her dissertation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Really?
In her dissertation. And when I read that, I laughed out loud this morning when I saw that headline. I just laughed, and my wife is thinking, "What is so funny?"
Yeah.
And I don't care who you are. That's funny. The author of White Fragility, who says that all white people are racist, is accused of plagiarizing minorities. The people that we're supposedly racist against.
But that almost goes right into her own wheelhouse of saying, "Well, of course I did, because I'm racist. Right,
exactly.
I'm an oppressor. Yes. See?
Yeah. Well,
my book is great.
I think her academic credentials are going to be stripped pretty soon. But here's the other irony that I want to share, and this is probably even a greater irony, and this makes me laugh even harder, and that is that Black Lives Matter is made up of trained Marxists, and they are proud of the fact that they are Marxists. If you're a Marxist, then Karl Marx is your hero. Karl Marx is the one who is out there fighting for this kind of justice, of equal outcome, the way that you think the world should be. Karl Marx was a rabid racist.
Yes, he was.
And Black Lives Matter is accusing white people of being racist, and they're accusing everybody of oppressing them, that they are victims. Black Lives Matter, we are all victims of racial oppression. That's what Black Lives Matter is all about. And yet they're Marxists, and their hero is the most racist man who has ever lived on the planet. And I document how racist Karl Marx was in my book. And I actually cite another book that was written, I believe, in 1929 called Karl Marx, Racist. And the book is full of documentation about how racist Karl Marx was. And he was racist specifically against black people. And black people are the ones who are behind this whole Black Lives Matter. And I made a meme about that. And I said, these people are Marxists. Marx is their hero. Marx is a racist. I don't care who you are. That's funny. But people don't even realize it. And I have Christian friends who are so enamored with Black Lives Matter. They think if you're a Christian, that you've got to go out and endorse and support Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Well, they're using the same words, same vocabulary that we would use, but it means something completely different. They're using a different dictionary. Of course, we believe that Black Lives Matter. As Christians, we believe that every human, that their lives matter, no matter what color of skin they are, because they're created in the image of God. So, of course, they do things like that so that Christians are like, yeah, Black lives do matter. Come on. But they have a completely different dictionary definition underneath that phrase, and so
right.
They are. It's a form of manipulation, because like we've said, Marxism is opposed to the law of Christ. We're going to keep going that over and over again. And we have an obligation as Christians to not be ignorant about this. There should be no, especially Christian leaders, there should be zero useful idiots out there. Zero ignorant Christian leaders on this. If we're shepherds, we need to be aware of what is threatening the sheep, what is threatening your sheep, your neighbors, and the least of these. And we need to be aware. And if you're not aware, you need to get aware. So I mean, it's impossible to actively promote Marxism as a consistent Christ follower. You cannot do it.
Yeah.
There's what concerns me is so many pastors and other Christian leaders with good hearts. They want to do the right thing, but they are ignorant of this evil. And so they then become the useful idiots, and by that become horrible shepherds. So I am, I was talking to Josh about this the other day. I have this drive. I look at what happened in Germany during the rise of the Nazi Party, and Eric Metaxas does a good job of discussing this, and he points out there's 18,000 German pastors during that time. 3,000 of them were vocally opposed to the Nazi Party and to Hitler. 3,000 of them were like, yeah, Hitler's doing the right thing. It's the Christian thing. Go Hitler. Right? They're completely off their rockers. And then there was 12,000 in the middle who were silent because they didn't want to get too political, or they were scared. They were cowards. Whatever the reason, they weren't good shepherds. And I say, Eric Metaxas points out that they failed the Jews, they failed the German people, they failed the rest of the world morally because they did not speak up and oppose this evil. And what drives me is a fear, a healthy fear of being one of those 12,000 German pastors. I don't want to be one of those 12,000 silent, scared pastors. And that's why I'm speaking out against this, because I see this as a clear and present danger.
And here's something that all Christians need to learn to watch out for. One of them is that there are white Christians who have actually conducted public demonstrations where they put chains on their around their wrists and put shackles on their wrists, and they chain themselves, and they go out and they bow down on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they repent because they are white. It is a visible demonstration of an apology for being white. These are Christians who have been so brainwashed into this ideology that they believe that they have been convinced that they are racist because they are white. And the terminology that you want to watch out for is called implicit bias. Mm-hmm. And there's even a psychological test that you can take that can give you your implicit bias score.
Yeah.
And Christians, there have been churches who have actually administered this test and given it to their congregations and said, hey, everybody, take this test because it'll tell you how racist you are.
Yeah.
And then you can repent before God for being a racist. And it is absolute, utter lunacy. It is absolute evil. And it is demonic. But I have a friend whose son made a video with his pastor. His pastor was black, and my friend's son got on this video and said, I just want to tell everybody that I've had an epiphany. I've had a revelation. I never knew this before. I've just discovered that I am a racist, and I want to repent of my racism. And he made that public video so that he could make it clear to the world, to anybody that watched, that he was acknowledging that he was a racist. And he thought that was a good and spiritual and virtuous thing to do. But it is demonic. It is absolutely demonic. I know his parents, and I know his grandfather. His grandfather was a Methodist minister, but he was not a part of the whole social justice Methodist wing of the Methodist Church. and they have been family friends for years and years. And his grandfather didn't have a racist bone in his body, and he taught his children not to be racist. He taught his children to love everyone equally, and his children taught their children, or at least I thought they did, taught their children that not to be racist as well. So there isn't a racist bone in that entire family, in the bodies of that entire family. That's how powerful this critical theory narrative is, because it can brainwash even people who should know better, and it can render them irrational, and that is.
Yeah, I think I think one of the other things, one of the other names to remember when you're talking about cultural Marxism and why these sorts of things happen, the apologies, the chains, is the Mao Zedong, the revolution, the Red Revolution in China. Those Maoists, they're called struggle sessions, where you struggle with your impurity, your impurity towards the state, and you come out and make a public mea culpa, and that absolves you of that responsibility, and now you're ingratiated into the good graces of the powers that be. And so it's treating.
That's the religion. It is so religious.
Yeah, yeah. So it's treating.
That's
so
there's atonement right there.
Yeah. So there's those re-education camps we talk about. You go and get re-educated. It's the end of 1984. You know, the book. He realizes that the state was always there and was always good.
Yeah, the Christian Sodium channels, his struggle sessions. I see modern mini versions of them all the time. That's something that we need to understand, that this is rampant in our society, and it is what Bill Withers, not Bill Withers. I'm getting the name wrong. Oh, I can't think of his name at this point, but he said it is so pervasive in our society. It is just simply what people believe. It is just, and systemic racism is one of the things. Bill Whittle, thank you, thank you. I definitely recommend. In fact, what I want to do is I would like to do a part 2 of this, because we have so much more ground to cover, and we're almost at an hour and a half mark. But But I want to recommend a video by Bill Whittle, and he just pretty much laid it out there and said, this is just what people believe. This idea of systemic racism. Racism is built into our very systems. It's built into the DNA of our society. And people just, when you tell people that the society is systemically racist, they just believe it, because they believe that it's just, they can look around and they can see what is occurring in society, and they can interpret it through the lens of Marxism and the lens of social justice, and it just makes sense. But it's all a lie. It's all an illusion. But it is so pervasive that it's almost impossible to convince somebody that systemic racism doesn't exist. It's almost impossible.
Well, and I was saying those struggle sessions and that systemic racist thought, really what that comes down to is not even virtue. We've coined the term virtue signaling. You signal your virtue so that you can claim allegiance to the party, so you now aren't one of the bad people that stand on the outside. So it's not even it's 90% of the time, I would say, 90% of the time, it's not even a legitimate or honest struggle session. It's you're just reciting what you've been told to recite so that you can live your life, and now you're on the good side. You're an ally now rather than somebody who's on the outside. Right. And it's almost like the conversion ritual.
That's why it's religious. It's a religion of works, is what Dr. Owen Anderson has pointed out. And a great article, he's a friend of mine, a great article called Mere Marxism. I think he stole that from me, from Mere Molinist. but he's got a great article, and let me see, where is it? You can find it at Clear Truth Media, and it's called Mere Marxism. But he points out that that Marxism is a religion of works, and everything that you said there, Josh.
Yeah.
If you do all these things, you're saved into the good guys. Now you're no longer the oppressor.
Right.
So,
and if we, I want to have a part 2 of this. In fact, we are going to have a part 2. Whether you guys want to or not, if you don't want to join me, you don't have to. I am gonna have a part 2. We are gonna have a part 2, and in part 2, what I will do is I will cover one of the chapters in my book called "The Glossary of the Social Justice Gospel," and it goes through a whole bunch of terms: God, man, sin, redemption, and it covers how all of these terms have been redefined in the social justice gospel. And you will hear these terms in even in the Christian church. You'll hear these terms, and people aren't aware of the fact that there are Marxists in the church that don't mean the same thing by redemption. They don't mean the same thing by sin. Sin is being white. That's the definition of sin in this ideology and in this religion, in this social justice gospel. So the other term that you will constantly hear is the term standpoint epistemology.
Yep.
Have you guys heard that term?
Yeah.
And standpoint epistemology is that if I'm in a minority, then all of the hardships that I endure in my life, that I experience, and I experience these hardships in an extremely powerful way. I'm poor. I was fired from my job. I don't make as much money as the white guy. And standpoint epistemology says that from your standpoint, you can understand the systemic oppression in our society like nobody else can. You're the only one that can understand it like you can understand it. And you know that you're being oppressed because you're experiencing it. Because from your standpoint, you see it in your daily life. You see it in your family members. Your family members are poor. Your family members don't have a very good education. Well, that's because they were beaten down by white people. And so how do I know that society is systemically racist? Because I've experienced it. I've lived it. And that's what standpoint epistemology is all about. It is almost impossible to convince somebody that they have been deceived in that kind of a situation. And like I said before, it's almost impossible to convince somebody that our society is not systemically racist. It is so deeply ingrained, and that is the beauty of critical theory. Because critical theory, its power is to actually be able to take hold of your emotions and manipulate them and incite and trigger this kind of primal rage, this and that kind of rage from what people are interpreting as their experiences. That kind of rage is almost impossible to overcome. You can't overcome it with reason, the way based on what reason really means. You cannot reason with somebody like that. You can't. You just can't reason with them. The reason that I wrote my book is not to try to convince the critical theory soldiers that they had been brainwashed. The reason I wrote my book is to try to prevent someone from getting brainwashed in the first place. Because once it has happened, it is short of a miracle from God. And I do believe that God does work miracles and can work miracles. God can bring people out of this ideology and of this sickness, this religion. But man, well, if it's just left to us, boy, you can pretty much forget it.
Yeah, I'll just say a few more things, and I think we need to probably be done here soon. But well, it's part of that is because the theology of grievance, the ideology of grievance, is so seductive. Because I mean, we all do it. Like when we feel wrong and we start grousing and complaining about it to people, and they go, "Yeah, you were wrong." You feel this sense of justice well up within you, and that's what standpoint epistemology does. And one of the other things I want to say is the weird thing about critical theory in particular is that it takes actual phenomena and then it builds an entire system around those things. So like systemic racism is an actual phenomena. Like it can actually be a thing, systemic racism. You should be able to find it in the systems and eradicate it. Like it's overt, but it is a thing. But then it builds a system around it and then systematizes it into a covert systemic racism, and it does the same thing with standpoint epistemology. One of the things I've always argued with Christians when they say, "Hey, the best way to share your gospel is to share your story," because nobody can argue with your experience.
Right.
And I've said it is powerful to share your story, but people can argue your experience. It actually your experience could be objectively false. Like unless we're willing to say that Muhammad actually had the experience with the angel Gabriel, and it might not, and it wasn't some demon, maybe that was his experience. We believe you experienced some sort of difficulty in your life. What we're saying is we don't think that your standpoint epistemology has the power to actually explain what exactly happened.
That's right.
Your interpretation is not infallible to what happened to you. And I'm sorry that you've interpreted it that way, or that those things did happen to you, because there are people, you can't completely understand somebody that's gone through something. They have some sort of standpoint epistemology in that sense.
But good luck convincing them that lived experience is deceitful and is an illusion. What I have argued in the book is, and I'll share this because I want to invite people to read it and comment on it. What I've argued, and by the way, this is the cover that I used to have because Tim was gonna make some contributions to it, and so this is an older cover.
I was like, wow, I'm honored to
author
that book.
Yeah. No, it was actually when I started writing this, you and I were gonna co-author this, but it ended up. I don't think you had near enough time to do that, and so, but what I argued in the book is not only that there is no evidence for systemic racism, but I provide lots of evidence, empirical evidence, that systemic racism does not exist. And again, when you have convinced someone that reason and truth based on Western principles is racist, then evidence doesn't even mean anything to them anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So you can provide evidence for something all day long, and it won't matter, because the minute you start providing evidence and argumentation and reason for somebody, they're immediately going to turn you off, because to them, you're just being racist. This is just more racism.
Logic is racist. Math is racist. Science is racist. We heard that many times during the 2020 riots. We saw academics saying these things. And so, it's impossible to reason with folks like that. It's the most insidious mind virus I've ever seen, and it's straight from the depths of hell. It is satanic. I mean, when an ideology can make a person give up reason,
it also makes a person give up agency, and that's the other thing it does. It makes them give up their agency, their ability to make a difference in their life. They are a victim to every other circumstance. And the last thing,
into free will. Yeah. Sorry, Josh. That just gets us into free will issues, so we can see how the things that we all focus on philosophically and theologically, these free will issues, it overlaps with these so-called political issues. And again, it's much more than politics. But Josh, finish.
When we get back together next time, one of the things I'd love to tackle is how it could happen, how Marxism could happen here and has happened, because I think beyond people buying into it, there are also people that are aloof to it, who just think, come on, the American system is so robust. There's no way that would happen. Tim, we've got an article that we're working on together. I sent you a portion of exactly the plan of how not just cultural Marxism, but classical Marxism could happen. And it's based not on my prognostication, but it's based on history in Venezuela and Russia. You can look at history in both those places. The same exact strategies are actually there. And in that section, I cite academic sources. I don't know if you looked at those, Tim, when I sent it to you. academic sources saying this is exactly what the Democrat platform is proposing right now. These same exact policies. Now, they might say, oh, but we wouldn't usher in Marxism. And as someone once wisely said, some of the most terrifying words in the English language is, hi, it's the government and we're here to help. So.
Yeah, it was Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's a good spot to end on.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And thank you for the comments. And thank you, Tim. Thank you, Josh. I am so glad that both of you joined, not just Tim. I'm so glad that you joined as well, Josh.
Appreciate it.
Your contribution to this is irreplaceable. So, yes, we will definitely continue this dialogue because it is so important. And I think Christians are called to rise up and to address what is occurring in our culture. If we don't do that, then we are not the salt of the earth the way that we are commanded to be. So this is what we're doing, and this is what we'll continue to do. And I will say so long for now, and I'm looking forward to the next session.
Absolutely. See ya.
All right.
See you guys.